touched upon a number of strategic projects in the energy sphere. This is the driver of our economic relations. And to give you an example, in November 2020, the Turkish stream gas pipeline was launched, which is an active step towards energy security of Turkey and of southeastern Europe. And in 2023, we are planning to make the first nuclear power plant in Turkey, the Akuyu power plant, operational. It was created and it is being created with Russian participation. This critical infrastructure objective for Turkey will help all civilians and all people of Turkey. We have discussed the efforts of both countries in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. We are thankful to the Turkish administration for registering Russia's Sputnik V vaccine. As for other issues, of course, we have addressed the situation in Ukraine. We have once again reaffirmed that the goal of Russia's actions, of all actions that Russia undertakes in Ukraine, is to protect the people of Donbass from direct military threat from the Kiev regime. Another threat of ours is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine so that all Ukrainian nationals of all ethnic groups could live in unity and friendship. And we value Ankara's balanced and unbiased approach, and we value that Ankara did not join the unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States against Russia, as well as its satellites. We have touched upon other constructive issues on the agenda. We believe that the joint work of our diplomats and our military officials helps support ceasefire in Syria, in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh and elsewhere. We are willing to continue to work on the Syrian track as well as other tracks. There we will continue to support the UN Security Council resolutions and their implementation. We call to organize Russia, Turkey and Iran trilateral summit that was supposed to take place this year in Tehran. We will continue to work with all sides, with the representatives of the opposition in Syria, to help make the Constitutional Committee truly inclusive, so that it could create the foundations for the constitutional reform in Syria. Later in March, this Constitutional Committee, the operations to create the Constitutional Committee will continue. As for the Caucasus region, since the start of this year, we have set the foundations for creating mechanisms of consulting of the 3+3 format. Georgia is currently thinking of joining this promising format, but as Russia has always said, we will be happy to see our Georgian counterparts at the sessions of this body. The first meeting between the special representatives on stabilizing Armenia and Azerbaijan normalization. The meeting has taken place between these representatives, and Russia supports, just as Turkey, Russia supports these efforts, and we will continue to work along all other lines that will help improve relations between countries of the Caucasus region. We have agreed to continue to hold further contacts. They have been traditionally very productive. Thank you.
kendisiyle birlikte çalışıyoruz. Tabii bugün özellikle Antalya'dan sonra burada tekrar bir araya geldiğimiz için de ayrıca mutluyum. Türkiye olarak Ukrayna'da yaşanan savaş ve krizin başından bu yana net bir tutum takındık. endişe ve eleştirilerimizi dürüst ve samimi şekilde paylaştık. Tansiyonun düşürülmesi ve diplomasiye alan açılması konusunda üzerimize düşeni yaptık ve bunun gerekliliğini her vesileyle vurguladık. Başından beri hem insani hem de kalıcı ateşkesin
Over 3 million people were forced to leave their country. All of that needs to be stopped so that there is no more bloodshed, no more tears.
yakın tarihte de önemli sınamalardan geçmiştir. Liderlerimiz arasındaki karşılıklı saygı ve güvene dayalı güçlü bir diyalog mevcuttur. Bu diyaloğun ikili ilişkilerimiz için olduğu kadar bölgemizin istikrar ve güvenliği için de son derece yararlı sonuçlar getirdiğine ve bundan sonra da getireceğine inanıyoruz. Rusya'nın güven duyduğu ve söylediklerine kulak verdiği bir ülke olarak Ukrayna krizinde de görüşlerimizi açık yüreklilikle ortaya koyuyoruz. Zira biz
So Russia, on the Ukrainian crisis, we support Russia because we are neighbors and friends, and we must talk openly about things that we believe to be right. Despite all the difficulties, we continue to trust in diplomacy. We continue to support that faith in diplomacy, and we believe in negotiations with respect to Ukraine, and we hope that they will be productive. We're doing everything in our power to help facilitate that process. For example, I've had a meeting with Mr. Kuleba and Foreign Minister Lavrov in Antalya. With each passing day, the positions of the officials of both sides is becoming clearer, and we are creating the grounds for further talks. But there are still many issues that destabilize the situation in the region. Over the past decades, we have seen negative ramifications of those problems, those long-standing issues. But now we are facing a critical moment when we must stop the violence, stop the bloodshed. Our president spoke to President Putin and to President Zelensky. Furthermore, there can be conversations, and there have been conversations over the telephone. I have talked to Foreign Minister Kuleba and Foreign Minister Lavrov on multiple occasions. Whenever I write them, whenever I call them, they always respond, and I'm thankful for that. Other nations also make their contribution to this dialogue, to this discussion. We must do everything in our power to stop the violence. We must join our forces to address this priority issue. And with this understanding in mind, I am now in Moscow. As you well know, Turkey has done a lot to help evacuate civilians. We have evacuated some civilians through Russia, and I'd like to thank Russia for making their contribution to the evacuation efforts. On that note, we continue to work together with Russia, and when it comes to Turkish nationals in Mariupol, they must all be evacuated, and we have addressed that issue on multiple occasions, including on the telephone, and we have spoken to military officials as well. Mr. Lavrov spent a lot of time and effort helping us with that. It is very important to achieve ceasefire as quickly as possible in order to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe from unfolding. We need to help humanitarian aid get to Ukraine, get to Mariupol. This is something that we also addressed today. We've made several decisions regarding that. On the other hand, the first priority right now is to achieve ceasefire. We have been talking to both sides, discussing that critical issue. This is what's at stake here, the security and stability in the region. Meanwhile, if Russia and Ukraine wouldn't trust us, then we wouldn't have achieved any results, but they do trust us. And so with Mr. Lavrov, we have discussed bilateral relations. It is critically important for the Constitutional Committee in Syria to see progress, and in Libya as well. We need to have progress in Libya, in Northern Caucasus, in other areas. Special representatives have held first contacts thanks to the efforts of Russia, thanks to the efforts of Moscow. I'm talking about, of course, also the diplomatic forum, the diplomatic efforts, which helped us a lot. Since the very beginning, Russia has been supporting us, and as we have also seen support from Azerbaijan. First off, let's achieve ceasefire so that our region is a peaceful one. After that, we can continue to work towards further stabilization and progress. Thank you once again, Mr. Lavrov, for helping us and providing support along those lines. Thank you. Mr. Erdogan has done something to help facilitate a meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky. Can you comment on that? Do you have any specific comments regarding that plan? Well, we haven't addressed that specific issue today because President Putin and other Russian representatives have commented on that before, responding to relevant questions. There are no obstacles to organizing such a meeting, unless, of course, we're talking about a meeting that's done just for the sake of meeting each other. No, we are talking about actually addressing certain issues, having contacts between the two delegations that met in Minsk 3 times. They have other contacts, and we see that the Ukrainian leadership pays special attention to the outside picture, to the picture that the outside world receives. For years, we have been trying to get the Kiev government to implement the Minsk agreement, and this is just the approach that we had. We wanted to meet Ukrainian officials, but once we met them, once they agreed to do something, then they just sabotaged all of our efforts. That happened in the Normandy Forum in 2019, and many times again. So we have learned our lesson from those previous negotiations. That is why when we want to have meeting, we want to have a meeting that will add some value to actually addressing the real problems on the ground and resolving the problem, the conflict. Thank you. It is important for the two leaders to meet. It has to do with all the aspects that we have been discussing. If a meeting like that should happen, that would be a good thing. I'm not going to go into details, but decisions should be made at the highest level. And naturally, should that happen, like before, should that happen, we will be happy to host a meeting, host a negotiation between the two leaders. The Ukrainian side insisted that this is the way it should happen, but what we believe, it doesn't matter where that happens. What matters is that it happens as quickly as possible. Russia and Ukraine must start actual effective negotiations, and we will help in any way we can to achieve that. During those first days, it was nearly impossible to help organize that, but now, if we can, we will continue to work towards that goal. Tsenia Shakalova, Sputnik. I have a question to both ministers. During today's talks, have you discussed the potential new contacts between Russia and Ukraine at the level of foreign ministers, at the mediation of Turkey, like in Antalya before? And if so, when could the next meeting take place? Also, during today's talks, have you reached some understanding about the timeline when Russian foreign minister could meet other officials? Well, we haven't discussed the specific plans for any further meeting between the foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine, but when we were in Antalya, when I talked to journalists, and we talked to journalists, we all expressed our belief that this would be a positive thing to do, a good thing to do, although we didn't see any clear initiatives coming from the Ukrainian side who initiated that meeting. But if we see an initiative like that, we will be happy to support it, with an understanding, of course, that the goal of that is getting some, like I said, some added value, so to speak. As for a meeting between Presidents Erdogan and Putin, we will continue to prepare for the 9th meeting of the highest levels council, and we will continue to prepare for that. It will take place later this year. Well, thank you. I hope that we won't have to meet to have any additional meetings at the highest level, but we are always happy to serve as mediators, and especially during these trying times, to help organize a meeting between my two counterparts. I hope that we will be able to organize a stable ceasefire, a sustainable ceasefire, and I will go to Ukraine soon and I will talk to Foreign Minister Kuleba. I hope that I won't have to meet any of the ministers to discuss just that. I hope that we will solve that issue today. Today we also talked about the 9th session of the Council on Cooperation on the highest level, and we heard that, and we are happy to say that we'll be happy to see Russia's delegation here in Turkey.
Dear Minister, you have just said about citizens that are in Mariupol, about Turkish nationals in Mariupol. What kind of things did you discuss? When would they start being evacuated? Could you give us any details on that? What will Russia do to evacuate Turkish nationals from Mariupol? And how will it help Turkey in this regard? Thank you very much. More than 15,000 people were evacuated from those difficult conditions, and some 200 Turkish nationals are in various cities, and Mariupol, the situation there is quite grave. The armed clashes are ongoing, continuing. There, the situation is very difficult. Some people take risk to make certain steps, but it's dangerous. We stay in contact with both sides. We would like to have observers to monitor the situation on the ground, and we would like to see humanitarian break to be installed, be put in place. But as a state, we respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine within the borders of the state, and we need to announce a humanitarian pause and to allow people to move whichever way they want to, whichever way they choose to. Some people we evacuated via Sochi to Turkey, but unfortunately now on the ground there is a lack of understanding, lack of communication. The parties have differences in how they see the situation, and I can see that Sergei is doing everything that he can. And we keep in contact with the Ukrainian side as well, but it has to do not only with our nationals, hundreds of thousands of people we are talking about Ukrainian citizens. Hopefully, in the shortest time, a solution will be found. Actually, Russia from the very beginning was trying to help with this issue, but as Minister said, not everything depends on us. Humanitarian corridors were discussed in detail during the Russian-Ukrainian talks in Belarus during the third round of the negotiations on March 7th. And already back then, the agreement was reached on how these corridors are supposed to function, that the Russian side suggests certain routes that our military on the ground will guarantee, which security they will guarantee at the Ukrainian side. If they can, they suggest their routes, and the people from the various cities and towns, they can make a free choice, like Minister Cavusoglu just said, because it's their right to go wherever is more convenient for them, wherever they want to go. All these days after the agreement was reached on March the 7th, the Ukrainian side was blocking all the exits to the Russian territory. What does that mean? Look at Mariupol. Our military are announcing a corridor, and the Ukrainian side is saying no. We are not going to allow people to go towards Russia. We are not going to provide the security. So in Russian, actually, it means they are forbidden from going there. They are forbidden from going to Russia. As for going further to Ukraine, Ukrainian representatives are not giving any particular security guarantees, so our goodwill is implemented in practice. Every day we announce humanitarian breaks, humanitarian pauses, and all it takes for the Ukrainian representatives from the Mariupol, where radicals and neo-Nazis reign supreme, stopped keeping foreigners, foreign nationals as human shields, as hostages. Minister is going to speak to the Ukrainian counterpart tomorrow, the way I understand it, and from our request and from his own volition, of course, he's going to discuss this matter again. The final question, please. Russia 24, Elizaveta Kramtsova. I've got a question for Mr. Lavrov. On Monday, we witnessed the tragedy in Donetsk when the Ukrainian .U, its shards killed civilians, more than 20 civilians, and we saw that the Western media mostly ignored what happened. Did you discuss today with Mr. Cavusoglu the tragedy that happened in Donetsk? Yes, we discussed it in the context of our general conversation about the biased and indecent position the West is taking in regards of what is happening in Ukraine. They keep on focusing quite loudly, and they do it as hard as they can. They draw attention to the humanitarian law, to the situation with the civilians. They support any fake news that the Ukrainian side is spreading every day in huge amounts. They believe any claims from Ukrainian propaganda that is providing photos and videos of their own brutality, of their own atrocities. So they say that what Russians do, actually. And they are ignoring the suffering of the civilians in Donetsk and Luhansk and other parts of Ukraine. Like throughout all these 8 years, while Ukraine was violating the Minsk agreements, 8 years of constant shelling of nurseries, schools, hospitals. So it didn't evoke any reaction, any compassion from the West, like the episode that you've just described. Shelling with the Tochka-U missiles, the downtown of Donetsk, that destroyed 20 lives, killed 20 people, and more people were wounded. It didn't evoke any compassionate reaction. The best I saw, they just demonstrated the place where this rocket landed, and then it said that the Russian military attacked some settlement controlled by the Ukrainian army. In all our contacts with our Western counterparts, we draw their attention to unacceptability of such blatant, inhumane double standards. And recently, the other day, I had this conversation with one of the leaders of one of the European leaders, and after listening to me attentively about Donetsk, about this outrageous shelling that violated the norms of humanitarian law. And that's what he said. Okay, I understand your version of what happened, so I think I don't even need to comment that. So leave it on the conscience of those who are covering for the crimes of the Ukrainian regime. Our military, with our participation, with the participation of diplomats, we are collecting this evidence of the crimes they perpetrate, and we are not going to let it go. Thank you very much. Thank you. We are concluding our press conference.